lost in your eyes. I'm lost
Hi everyone, my name is Gabrielle, and if you're new here, I make motherhood and lifestyle videos. Today I'm going to be talking about the story of my third home birth. Now, this home birth experience was a lot different than my previous two home birth experiences. The one with my first, which is my daughter, was very long and it was just really long and intense. My second home birth was my son Elisha, and it wasn't nearly as long, but I pushed for a long time and he was sunny side up and we weren't aware of that. So that made for a very difficult labor and delivery. And this third round was just literally everything I could have asked for went just perfectly. It was just such a blessing, and God really answered my prayers and alleviated a lot of my fears that I was having leading up to this birth. It was just so beautiful. So I went 11 days late. Now, that's not unusual for me. My last birth, I went 10 days late. I wasn't expecting to go 11 days late though. I was expecting maybe like a week, not any more than that, because I was having so much prodromal labor. I had about 2 weeks of prodromal labor before I actually went into labor with Judah. And it was exhausting, especially with having 3 kids. I was having a whole bunch of hip issues and everything, so I was going to the chiropractor every week, which was helping tremendously. Like, it went from me being in excruciating pain, like walking up the stairs and even just walking around in general, to basically eliminating probably 90% of my pain, which was very helpful and definitely well worth the money spent on getting adjusted at the chiropractor. Those 11 days were tiring. I started going into what I thought was early labor on February 13th. So I called my husband and let him know, hey, I'm having contractions like every 3 minutes apart, and it's been happening for about an hour. So I wasn't really getting my hopes up because that had happened before with the previous prodromal labor. So I was just kind of giving him a heads up, being like, hey, you know, you may work the rest of the day from home. So he came home that afternoon. My contractions were basically 15 to 17 minutes apart, which is really not anything too exciting. So I told him, hey, why don't we go to the mall and we'll go get dinner and we can walk around. Maybe it'll kick the contractions back in a little bit more and see if it just goes anywhere. So we went to Mad Greens and got a really yummy salad, and then we went and walked for 2 miles around the mall actually. Got home, we put the kids to bed, and I was still having them about every 15 to 17 minutes apart. Honestly, they weren't really feeling like anything. And then once we got the kids to bed, which was around 9 o'clock on February 13th, I told my husband, babe, they're absolutely not there. Like, they're gone. I don't think this is gonna turn anything. And we were both just bummed, like, because this had happened several nights in a row where I thought I was in labor and it ended up fizzling out and not turning into anything at all. So, like, I'm not even kidding you, 10 minutes later I had this really strong contraction and I'm like, okay, this is good. Come on, let's keep this up. Like, that's right, let's keep these contractions up. So still wasn't trying to get my hopes up too much, but then all of a sudden they were every 3 minutes apart, just one on top of another. And I was laboring on the toilet, which speeds things along in general because of the positioning. It's a very relaxed position, helps the baby's head descend really low into the pelvis. Since I was lasting for about an hour, Brandon went ahead and called my midwife, and she said, you know, this sounds like it could be the real deal. So why don't you go ahead and go to bed, and if the contractions continue to get stronger, then you're most likely in labor. So we went ahead and watched a show in bed for like about an hour, and it was about 11:30 midnight when we actually like went to bed or tried to go to bed. I was having the contractions still only about around that 15-16 minute mark, which was really weird to me because they weren't really overly strong and not like extremely painful, and I was just like, this is so weird. And I wasn't having any back labor whatsoever, whereas with my previous births I had oh my gosh, it was literally the worst pain in my life, the back labor I had, especially with my previous son. The pain was horrible, and like even between contractions, the pain would never let up. My back still hurt so bad. But with this, it wasn't doing that. So this whole time I'm like, I don't know if I'm really in labor. Like this doesn't, it just, like, I don't know if this is legit or not. And so basically they kept coming, and then all of a sudden I felt a pop. And I'm like, hold up, okay, wait a second. And I smacked Brandon, I'm like, babe, I think my water broke. And he's like, are you sure? And so I get down on my hands and knees on the ground. We had like one of those Chucks pad next to the bed. And I get down and like it goes whoosh. I'm like, yeah, I think my water broke. So I go into the bathroom and sit on the toilet, and then it just gushes again. And obviously if you're watching this video, you're expecting TMI stuff. So I'm not gonna be prohibiting that from this video too much. But anyways, it just gushed again. And that was the weirdest, like for real, the weirdest sensation ever, because in my previous 2 deliveries, my water didn't break on its own. So this was a completely different experience and just really weird. So here I'm in the bathroom, and just like all of a sudden the contraction was just like boom, one on top of another. And I am just like, oh my gosh, we're having a baby. And I told Brandon, like, we're having a baby. And then like when that's happening, our daughter woke up because both of our kids were asleep in the room next door. And so he goes in there. Thankfully he was able to get her to sleep again, because that was one thing that I was really stressed about, trying to figure out like the actual logistics of getting the kids to bed and staying asleep, and whether we needed to call someone if I went to labor way early in the morning or what. Anyways, it was just wild at how fast it went. So Clara, I was in labor for 31 hours. Elisha, I was in labor for 12 hours. This one, it's just like, wow, I kind of got like piddly labor going on, and all of a sudden my water breaks, and then it's just boom. Basically, I went to transition within, I would say, less than 30 minutes, and my midwife got there finally. Thankfully, she made it to the birth. That was definitely a good thing. We're definitely prepared for delivering the baby by ourselves if we had to, because once you've done it 3 times, you kind of get the whole thing. The only thing I was worried about was hemorrhaging, because I've hemorrhaged really bad with my previous 2 births. So thankfully the midwife made it, and we didn't have to worry about that. When my midwife got there, I had her check me, and the whole time I'm like, oh, I'm probably not even far along and all, like this, it's not gonna be. And so she checks me, and I was like at a 9.5 already, like 9.5. And I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like that's great. I tell her, I'm like, how long do you think it's gonna be? She's like, it's gonna be soon. It's gonna be soon. No, like, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, how mentally prepared should I be for this? Is it gonna soon, like 10 hours from now, or soon like 30 minutes from now? I don't know. But anyways, just went with the flow. You know, you kind of obviously have to when you are in labor. And so I go back and get on the toilet to labor again. Of course, it's feeding things along. And the weird thing was, as I'm laboring and going through these contractions, that obviously they're getting closer and closer, I got really quiet during transition, and this whole time my midwife and her assistant were thinking that I actually was having a break from contractions, and I really wasn't. I was just internalizing everything. And I remember doing that with Clara's birth, where when I was going through transition, I just started internalizing the pain and everything, and just working really strong and deeply through the contractions, along with Brandon supporting me. And it's just such a weird feeling doing that. Because your body's just so powerful. Like, women's bodies are amazing. God designed our bodies to just do amazing things through growing a baby and going through labor and delivery and feeding it. Just all of that is amazing. And it doesn't matter how you had your baby, you are amazing, because like, you mamas who have C-sections are absolutely amazing. That scares the living daylights out of me to go through that. You guys are amazing. Doesn't matter how you had your baby. Every birth story is beautiful and is just amazing. It's just baffles my mind how amazing birth is. Hold up. Hold up, hold up. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, it was like way under the, flung like way under the bed. So anyways, Brandon is such a great support to me. We have always worked together as such a wonderful team together. So that's why I've never hired a doula. And because he just knows what I need, and especially with this being the third time around, he just is so solid. He is my rock through labor and delivery, and I'm so very grateful for him. After that quiet time of internalizing the labor contractions and everything, I basically felt like I had to push. I pushed a little bit, and dang it, dude, you're binky, seriously. So I felt the urge to push, and my midwife was like, wait a second, was that, are you pushing? I'm like, yeah. And so she had to come in and she checked on the baby, and she couldn't actually catch the baby's heart tones, which was freaky. And so she's trying. I got off the toilet and was like squatting on the ground, pushing, I don't know, two times or so, I don't know. And then she's like, we need to get you to the bed immediately, because we need to find baby's heart tones. So they get me to the bed. Of course, I was planning to have a water birth again. I just guess I'm not meant to have water births, because my husband filled it up, but the water got cold, and then everything happened so quickly, we weren't able to get it filled up with warm water quick enough. So here I was, the third time having my baby on our bed again, when every single time I have tried to have a water birth, and it just hasn't been in the books for me. These binkies, man, I'm telling you, little boy. I mean, I can't complain because this birth was amazing. So anyways, they get me on the bed and lay me down, and she finally was able to find the heart tones, which was relieving. And I'm like, oh my, is the baby okay? And like, I pushed for, gosh, like less than 10 minutes. So as I was pushing, my midwife was like, okay, this next push, he needs to come out because his heart tones were dropping. And so I pushed again, and there he just flew out like butter, and it was just so amazing. And of course, I didn't know the gender, because we were having, that was gonna be a surprise for us. But like in my heart, I knew he was a boy, and so I like looked down, and I'm like, and I like feel something. I'm like, oh, he's definitely a boy. And I look at him, I'm like, can you double check? And yeah, he was a boy. I think it was because I was able to experience like their movements and everything past like the typical 17 or 18 weeks that you find out the gender. Since we didn't find out then, I feel like I was able to get to know his personality a little bit better. So obviously I highly recommend HOMEBIRTH, and it's just an awesome experience. Now, the only scary part that I had with this experience was actually postpartum. So I was 4 days postpartum, or actually I was 3 days postpartum, and within the instructions, if you had a baby, you're always told to be aware of whether you or baby have any sign of fever. Well, there's a certain threshold as to what that fever gets above and whether you should go to the hospital or not. So I was not feeling very well. I felt like I had a fever, and then I told my husband, hey, I'm gonna go to sleep, try to rest and see if I feel any better. So I went ahead and rested for about 2 or 3 hours. When I got up, I took my temperature, and it was above that mark. It was over, it was like 101.8 or almost 102 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that was really frustrating, because we called my midwife, and she's like, you know, the only thing I can advise for you to do is go to the ER, because you really, like, there's nothing I can do, and you need to make sure that you're okay. Otherwise, it could be really bad. So we go to the ER, and basically I went through all these different tests. I had ultrasounds done, and then they did a internal exam, which was, you know, not the greatest, not the most fun experience. But when they did that internal exam, they found out that I had an infection in my uterus. So that was overwhelming. So we asked them to give us our options, and they're like, well, you can, you know, you can either take pill form, or you can take an IV of antibiotics, which is what they recommended. And we're like, well, what if you like don't do anything? They're like, well, basically you become septic and you could die. So we're like, okay, we get the picture. Let's go ahead and do the IV of antibiotics. And so I was then administered to the hospital that night, and had some lovely people, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people from our church come and stay with me while my husband went back home to take care of the kids. He stayed the night with the kids. We had some awesome people watch them while I was at the hospital. And then the next morning, Brandon came and stayed with me till I got discharged later that evening. Yeah, it was like really late. So I was there in the hospital for about 36 hours. So that was really not my plan. I had a uterine infection, and it definitely makes you thankful for modern medicine within that. Like, that's the thing, like with home birth, you don't know if something's gonna go wrong, and that's why you always have a backup plan. You always make sure that you have a backup plan, so that if things do go wrong, you're there. Oh my gosh, he's starting to fall asleep. So that definitely wasn't expected, and I was stressing about everything within that, because like in my mind I'm like, oh, we just paid for a home birth, now we have to pay for this and all that. But you know, God provides, and things are gonna work out just fine. And I'm thankful for modern medicine, the fact that I was able to feel better like so quickly. Now I did have to take 2 weeks of antibiotics, or a 2-week course of antibiotics at home also. And I felt pretty crummy, still very weak. It definitely extended my healing and my postpartum recovery phase. But other than that, it was good. My mom came into town like the night that I was discharged from the hospital, and she stayed with me for about 5 days, which was really helpful having her there to be able to help with the older two. My little brother was there also, and he was super, super helpful. But yeah, you know, I could not be more thankful and grateful for this home birth. It was just, it went way above and beyond what I was expecting, and I am so thankful to God for that, and for answering my prayers and putting my fears at ease. And it was just beautiful. Yeah, that's how you describe it. It was beautiful, and I'm very thankful and blessed.